Going live. There we go.
Hello. Are we live?
I believe we are.
I believe we are. Excellent. Hey, everybody. I think there might be a bit of a delay because I'm not seeing it live yet, but we should be. There we go. Very cool. Sorry, I was just getting double feedback. Apologies, everyone. I think we're going to give it a few minutes while people start joining because we were a few seconds early. Let's give some people time to join. There we go, people are joining. But as we do that, how is everybody today? So I'm in the UK today. Where are you? Well, I know where you are, but why don't we let everybody know where we are located today?
So I am based in the southeast of sunny London. Although it's been remarkably variable weather today, it feels almost like the end of times. Like it's been gloriously sunny, horrendous rain, clouds, lightning, probably going to snow later. Definitely a good day.
Very diverse. It's been sunny over here in the south of England. So it's been beautiful. Where are you at, Akanksha, today?
Hi, everybody. I am actually in sunny San Francisco Bay Area.
Amazing. Great. So we have more and more people joining in, which is fantastic. So we're going to get the ball rolling. Hey, everybody. I am Andrea from The Product Dynamic, and with me here today is Jason, our other co-founder, and our speaker, Akanksha Talya. Before we kind of get going with the presentation, a couple of things. This is being streamed live on YouTube, of course, so if you have to drop off, don't worry, you will be able to watch it back on the exact same link. And you can always share it to anyone that you think might find this interesting. We will be doing a Q&A at the end as well. And we may have some interactive polls and some conversations going on throughout. So be sure to participate, and you can drop any comments on the YouTube chat. We will be monitoring the chats and flashing any questions on screen. So with that, let's get started. Akanksha, all yours.
Thank you, Andrea and Jason. Hi, everybody. Good morning and good evening. It is a pleasure to be here. And I want to thank Product Dynamic for actually creating a platform at the intersection of product inclusion, neurodiversity, talking about ethics and AI. I think that's a conversation that is very, very important. And I'm excited to actually touch and explore with you today how product managers are actually catalysts of both internal and external inclusion. So let me start sharing my screen pretty quickly. All right. Again, excited to be here, and you can find me on Twitter or LinkedIn if you'd like to keep in touch after the session. Looking forward to it. Okay, awesome. So a little bit about me. I'm Akanksha. I'm currently based in the San Francisco Bay Area. I have around 15 years of leadership experience in B2B SaaS. And most recently, I was product management executive at GE Digital. Prior to that as well, I've worked in B2B SaaS software space with the Deloitte and Tata Consultancy Services. And currently, I'm also an investor and a venture-backed startup advisor, really helping companies scale their product management functions as they enter the hyper-growth stage. Once they have graduated from the 0 to 1 stage and have found product market fit, I'm helping companies stand up their product management function so that they can become the tip of the spear to actually help them reach the hyper-growth and capture more market. Personally, I'm a long-distance hiker, a fitness enthusiast. Spent time working in 4 different continents. Came to the US in 2007. And in all my career, all these experiences have really deeply shaped how I think about diversity, how I think about creating inclusive environment for my teams and also for the customers that we serve. So today we're going to talk about, inclusive products and what's happening and what can we do as product management leaders in creating, products that are inclusive. So I looked at the people who had RSVP to the event, and majority of them, were product leaders and product members, product managers. So I wanted to throw out a challenge up front in the presentation that you, in your role as product managers, are very uniquely positioned to make a very big impact on diversity and inclusion. And why is that? Why do I say that you are very uniquely positioned? And I want you to sort of take this challenge to drive this impact both internally and externally. First, we all come to product management from a variety of careers. I came from strategy and technology consulting. I know a lot of people who have transitioned into product management from customer success or marketing or even professional services or analytics. But one common theme in people who actually do make that transition is they're all problem solvers. I'm a problem solver. And many people that I've worked with in product management on my teams or otherwise, they're all at the core, they're problem solvers. And they may be solving problems from a user perspective, from a market perspective, from a technology perspective, but we are all problem solvers. And really increasing diversity and inclusion in our own teams and how we build inclusive products is a problem worth solving. So I want to raise this challenge to you. And then second, if we are successful as product leaders and product managers, we have to have strong opinions that are weakly held. We have to be curious, to be listening to almost all stakeholders, not just stakeholders, but also all parts of the 360 ecosystem that we operate and build our products in. So we all have, as this quote says, strong opinions that are weakly held. And that's all diversity and inclusion is about, being open to diverse opinions and being open to change and being open to evolving your point of view. Now, why do I think product inclusion is important? I'll touch upon that right now, and then also we'll talk about this in the end of the session. I fundamentally believe there are two ways in which the world feels or touches an organization. One is what the organization is composed of itself, right? The teams, the people they hire, the leadership teams, the boards that serve on that organization. And the second one is the products that the company builds. There's a lot of great work that is happening in the world right now around diversity and inclusion within the organizations itself. And that is a foundational lever for building diverse and inclusive products. So today we're going to explore the second element in which an organization expresses itself in the world, is the products that the organization builds. And how can we make them more inclusive to make sure that they are adopted by the larger cross-section of the not just the market, but they're able to make the impact that the products are intended to make. All right. So before we talk about what can we do as product leaders and product managers in building inclusive products, let's just look at a few biases and just understand them and be more aware of what kind of biases actually do exist at the intersection of technology, product management, and how they may or may not impact diversity. So I'm going to share 4 examples. The first one is an example of Kodak. We call this selection bias, but Kodak back in 1950s was the predominant supplier of cameras, of the reels that were used to print images. Gosh, it feels like so many ages ago then, but we used to have those physical reels, camera rolls that we used to use to actually take images and take pictures. But back in 1950, because Kodak was the only supplier or the company that had the largest market share, they wanted to make sure that any of the printers who were actually developing those prints, were doing it right, and were doing it by a particular, calibration. So to calibrate, they published something called as a Shirley card. On that Shirley card would typically be a light-skinned woman. The first person who was on that card was named Shirley, so that's the calibration card, started being known as the Shirley card. So that calibration card known as Shirley card would be available and will be given to all the printers who would actually develop those camera rolls to actually make images. And the calibration point was, this is how the colors should come out when you're developing an image using the Kodak camera or the Kodak prints. It was all well intentioned, but as you can see, the person on the card is a fairly light-skinned person, doesn't represent everybody that is on an image, whether it is race, gender, it can be, or the color of skin. But this problem was really not even diagnosed or acknowledged. A lot of people thought that the images that were coming out using the Shirley card calibration were not good for a person of different color because of lighting or something else was going on. So nobody really brought it up because everybody thought that this light colored image was the norm. But majority of the population didn't really reflect the norm. But when did it get started? When did it start getting diagnosed or become an issue? This became an issue when a lot of furniture manufacturers, they started realizing that the Kodak camera and the prints, didn't really distinguish well between light grained and dark grained furniture because they were using these cameras to take furniture pictures. And then they wrote to Kodak saying your cameras do not really distinguish very well between light grained and dark grained furniture. And that is when Kodak started noticing. And almost 30, 35 years later, Kodak changed their Shirley card to include multiracial cards that would change how the norm was set about how the pictures should look and how the colors should be developed. Now, this was all well-intentioned, but really, at the heart of it, there was a selection bias because the participants or the data that was provided to create the calibration card was not representative of the entire population who was developing these pictures or who was in these pictures. So that's one example. So think about your products, in what data you're providing your products or your product engines, and how are you calibrating your products to drive a certain outcome, and where there may be some bias. So think about that for a little bit, and then we'll talk about how to eliminate bias, the second portion of the presentation. So we talked about one, selection bias. Now there's another type of bias, interaction bias. So we are all building our products now using AI and ML, and machine learning by default means we have to train models. We have to provide past or training data to those models to recognize certain patterns. And those are the patterns that those models sort of build upon. Now, for ML to really diagnose or identify physicist or image of a physicist, if we feed that model physicist images based on just past, which were predominantly men, the algorithm wouldn't really detect a female to be a physicist. So that's really the interaction bias. We are influencing an algorithm by interacting with it in a way that overrepresents one group. In this case, that one group being only male physicists, because there were not a lot of examples way back in the past, or at least not pictures of them, but that included women. So we were by default, without really consciously thinking about it, teaching the algorithm to include the less prevalent data, which is women as physicists. So that is, again, we're giving the model a stimulus or a set of data, and it's training it in a direction that's not representative of the full population. Again, think about how you may be, as you build your products and as you train the models within your algorithms, what type of data you're providing and what you may be accidentally excluding in building that pattern capability within those models. The third example I would give is of what I would call as a latent bias. It's a slight adjustment from the previous one that we just discussed, which was interaction biased. So when YouTube was launched, and this image is actually from Google's website. This quote and this text is from Google's website as well. This was written by Laszlo Bock, which was he was the SVP of People Operations at Google. And when YouTube was launched, when they created their first video app for iPhone on iOS, we realized that 5 to 10% of the videos that were uploaded by users were upside down. They would take the videos, upload it on the website using their app, the iOS app, Apple app, and 5 to 10% of them were upside down. Why? Were the users shooting them incorrectly? Actually, no. The challenge that the team discovered was the design of the product itself. It was designed for right-handed users. The phones were designed for right-handed users, but more importantly, the YouTube app that was on the iOS was designed for right-handed users only. So when the users were taking the video, they would usually rotate it by 180 degrees in their left hands when they were using their left hands. And without realizing it, YouTube had created an app that worked best only for right-handed people, whereas the videos looked inverted when they were being used by a left-handed audience. So again, this is an example of an unconscious bias. It's hidden. It's not intentional. It's hidden. That just translates into how we develop products, how those designs show up in a good experience or a bad experience for a certain user. Now let's look at the fourth example, a gender bias. So before I tell you what these 4 images are about, depending on how you're looking at the screen, on the left-hand side, my left-hand side, there are 2 circles, two circular images. And on my right-hand side, there is 1 circular image, and then there's a cartoon that looks like a man. So I'd love for you to type in, do you recognize what is on my left, which is these two circular images? Do you recognize what these images stand for? Which products do they represent? On the left. And Jason and Andrea, let me know if people type in some responses to the images that are on the left, the circular images. Any responses that you're seeing? Okay, I'll just keep on going. Then on the right, again, there is a circular image and there is a cartoon that looks like a man. So I hope you're typing some of these responses and are able to at least recognize some of these logos. So on the
one response, sorry, one response.
Okay.
Srinivas says left Siri.
Very good. Very good.
Satya says logos of some company on the left and Salesforce Einstein.
That's right. That's right. Well, I'm glad that we at least found Siri and Einstein. That's exactly right. The point I'm trying to make here is just in the naming of these products, there is a stereotypical gender norm that we have cascaded. On the circular images on the left, on my left, are Siri and Alexa. These are virtual assistants. Whereas on my right is Salesforce Einstein and IBM Watson, which are expert computers. So we have, just by naming them, female as assistants, with female names and supercomputers as male names, we've just cascaded the stereotypical heteronormative gender norm that we typically see or have seen in the workplace. It has nothing to do with design, but name. So here's where we are perpetuating a certain type of a gender bias just by using a certain type of name for our products. So think about the products when you name your products, like how are you or not perpetuating a certain type of bias. It can be a latent bias, it can be gender bias like is shown on the screen, it can be interaction bias, or it can be a selection bias like we talked about in Kodak. The purpose of this first 4 slides was really to make us aware that these unconscious biases exist. All of this is not intentional. These were really good examples that were very well-intentioned, but at the same time, there was something hidden and something unconscious about these examples that actually created an unideal experience for certain part of the users that they were trying to serve. They were all based on data, but they were not neutral. So again, just because something is based on data, we use a lot of data in how we build our products today, especially AI and ML products. That does not make it neutral because there is something always missing, and we as product managers need to seek what is that is missing. And oftentimes our own biases, just like we talked about in the name of virtual assistants versus supercomputers, Siri and Alexa versus Einstein and IBM Watson, our own biases show up in the products that we are building. We talk about empathy quite a bit in product design, and we've made a lot of progress across a variety of companies in how empathy shapes product design. We also need to take the concept of empathy now to data. How do we have empathetic AI that is not just representing the data that has been fed to the model, but is empathetic beyond the data and is constantly learning so that it is not just representing a certain subset of the user base that was fed into the initial model. A great way to say this is also any technology or product that we build is a mirror of the society or the societal biases that exist today. Because we are all part of society, we all have unconscious biases. Without even trying, we overlay our own biases into the products that we built for us and for our customers. And I'd like us to explore now, as we move to the second part of the presentation, what can we do? What can we do? There's no silver bullet, but what can we do to eliminate some of these unconscious biases in how we build the products? It's a complex issue. There is no magic bullet. It's a journey, but at the same time, us getting aware of some of these conscious biases hopefully will, not just incentivize us, but motivate us to build products that work for everybody, not just for a particular segment or particular section of or type of users, Technology should work for everybody. And that's where I'd like to go back to the challenge that I gave at the beginning of the presentation, that product managers have a critical catalytic role to play in accelerating internal and external inclusion. So how do we move in the right direction? I'm not saying by any means I have the silver bullet. Absolutely not, because this is a very complex topic. This is something that will need years and a lot of work by a variety of people in any company or any product development process to move the needle on. But hopefully the 4 things I'm going to share with you make you more aware, and hopefully your journey can move in the right direction. First and foremost, inclusive teams. Absolutely. There is a lot of work that is happening right now across a lot of organizations in building better teams, having better, more inclusive leadership structures, more inclusive leadership teams across gender, across race, across age. And all that work is absolutely important. But when it comes to building products, while your company may be diverse, it is very important that we take a look around the table and see, are we getting enough diverse perspective? Is there a seat that is empty on the table in our product development teams that is not being representative? That's not being represented. Amazon talks about leaving a chair empty for the customer. That's very important because we want to think about the customer and make sure that we are always thinking about the needs of the customer. But there are other seats that are also very, very important that can channel the perspective of that customer. I come from B2B SaaS space. In my last role, we were building industrial software products, right? And one of the things that we are learning is it's really the digital transformation that is happening in the B2B world, whether it is through SaaS or any other form of software offering, is really changing the way customers execute their workflows, changing the way customers are doing their business process design. That is that is the underlying thing that is changing. Typically, when we work in building our products, in the early phases, the teams can be very technology heavy or just domain experts heavy. I've worked on both types of teams that are either just all domain experts or just all technologists. And where the world is heading is we're moving from processes being run by domain experts that are augmented by technology to processes being run by technology that are augmented by domain experts, which have the heuristic knowledge about how things work. So when we build our own teams, it's very important that we're balancing the breakdown of domain experts, consumer advocates, technologies, industrial designers, and finding that right balance so that we can help our customers move from a domain expert augmented by technology to a technology augmented by domain experts. And that transition is not happening at the same pace in all of the industries. So, you have to obviously meet where your individual customers are. But the first prerogative and the first foundation of building inclusive products is absolutely building inclusive teams. In addition to inclusion, the other thing that I look for is, are you also creating an environment where people can disagree? There is enough constructive criticism happening that people can actually share a point of view that they have, or an opinion that is different than the norm on the table. And to me, that is what this red seat sort of exemplifies, like somebody who has a contrarian point of view versus everybody sort of aligning and saying yes to an idea. We'll never be inclusive and we'll never build inclusive products if everybody thinks we've covered all bases. There has to be somebody who's challenging the status quo. That brings me to my second point, is designing with inclusion actually begins with recognizing where are we actually excluding somebody. We don't know that our products are not inclusive. Oftentimes they are not, but we don't know, and we don't sometimes spend the energy to even recognize where we are being exclusive. Regardless of your role in the organization, you don't need to ask for permission to solve for inclusion. All you need to do is to be dissatisfied with the status quo of how inclusive your product is or may be, and use techniques like red teaming to know where inclusion might be breaking down. And obviously, for red teaming to work, you need an environment where people can constructively disagree with each other and share opinions that are not the norm in the company. The other thing I will say is, not every company can hire product inclusion experts. I consult a lot of startups who are in the 0 to 1 or 1 to 1 billion, users face, they don't have either the money or capacity or the speed to hire product inclusion experts. Maybe large companies can, but early stage startups sometimes don't have that luxury, especially when they're bootstrapped. So this creating this culture and environment of constructive criticism is absolutely key, so that you're not sort of outsourcing the responsibility of having that inclusive thought when you're building product to an inclusion expert that you are waiting to hire when you will have the money or when you will have the time. So this is a foundational step in making sure you are building an inclusive culture by having constructive criticism in your organization. The second part of that is also taking a look at your processes. Sometimes you end up creating exclusion for either users or geographies or location or language or anything, or even race or gender, because of some of the minimal criteria that exist within the organization. It can be legal, it can be workplace safety related, it can be any processes that are tied to some mandatory training that only cover minimal basis versus not the maximum to address the full workforce. So again, look for spaces where exclusion might be happening is a way to find where your product can be more inclusive. And sometimes those legal, workplace safety, ESG criteria are just minimal enough, but not inclusive enough to cover everybody from a user and employee perspective. That's number 2. Now, number 3 and 4 are more from a data perspective. So, we can solve for inclusiveness by really having, as I said, an empathetic design point of view, but data needs to be trained for empathy. And what data we take in and how we train it and what input we give to those training models determines whether or not your AI ML model is empathetic enough or not. And that takes time. The data that, our AI models are large. They take in a large amount of data. And what we put in those models is actually the key kernel for whether or not they are inclusive or not. And typically, we miss out on inclusive AI or inclusive analytics if you're moving too fast. I know in the Silicon Valley, at least where I work, the concept of moving fast and breaking things is considered like a slogan of good work, or slogan of a standard, just moving fast. But when it comes to building products that are inclusive, it's not just okay to move fast and break things. It's about moving fast and doing things right. And sometimes that can also come at the cost of slowing down, especially if you're working on a product that reaches millions and millions of users. It's okay to be fast when you are in the 0 to 1 stage, but by the time your product is scaled and you're reaching millions and millions of users, it's very important to slow down and think about inclusion and think about the data that you're capturing and what you're doing with that data and what you're feeding your training and ML models becomes very, very important. So the key points I want to make here is make sure that you are working in an MVP way. You're iteratively scaling to include more and more context in your data, not just limit to the context that you provided in the first or second or third training of your model, but increasingly improve the context that you're providing your analytical models. Increasingly improving the nuance that you are providing to your analytical models. AI ML products are never done. If somebody tells you that they're working on an AI ML product and it hasn't changed in the last 2 months or 3 months or 6 months, that product is stale. That product is not growing and probably will never represent the needs of the user. So AI ML products are never done. They're always living just because of this constant need to keep the models tuned up, keep the models trained up to the context that is always evolving in which the products serve. So it's a life cycle that needs constant investment from every perspective, from data, from keeping those products up and running, but more importantly, just learning from that data and refining those algorithms so that they are making progress on the fairness, on the equity portion of the product's impact. And then finally, as I said, when it comes to products that are already at scale, it is important to slow down and make sure you're building in those learnings from an inclusion perspective or fairness or equity perspective or the reach or where you're breaking down inclusion versus exclusion upfront into the product development process. You can move fast in the 0 to 1 phase, and it's okay to do that, but you do have to build some processes when you are a product at scale. And finally, there is no inclusive AI or inclusive analytical product without IA. And I can't take credit for this. I remember speaking to somebody or maybe attending a talk, and this term really resonated with me, that there is no inclusive AI without IA. You cannot have a smart product if you don't have the right information architecture. That information architecture and the products you're building is absolutely key. The products are living and it's a life cycle. So data lifecycle management, data context, changing that context on a regular basis, documenting your data feeds, what type of data is coming, what did we select, what did we not select, more importantly, what did we leave out, and revisiting it on a regular basis to expand the context that you're providing your AI models is very key. Data governance is very key for a very inclusive data solution and a data strategy. So there is no inclusive AI without a robust information architecture, IA, and that is also a living and breathing system that underpins the foundation of a strong, inclusive AI algorithm. So, so far in the conversation, we have uncovered 4 types of unconscious biases, and we've also looked at 4 ways to unlock inclusion in your products or reduce exclusion. Those 4 ways were building inclusive teams, making sure which seat is empty and how do you fill it, and finding the right balance between domain and customer advocates. We talked about proactively finding ways in which you recognize exclusion so that you can address it. Taking the time to do things right, and especially keeping the life cycle of AI/ML products on versus letting them go stale, and increasing the context. And third, really having a strong information architecture, because there is no inclusive AI without IA. So in closing, I just want to leave 2 thoughts. Why bother? Why bother? Why care about product inclusion? Well, in my opinion, regardless of which type of industry you serve in, B2B or B2C, product inclusion actually impacts companies' key performance indicators. If you're in software, you are most likely really interested in making sure your product is adopted, the NPS, retention, renewal, and most often, even if you're in the B2B side or B2C side, where there is a more direct impact, all of these things, retention, renewal, time to value, they are tied to how inclusive either your product development process is or how inclusive you are in building for a diverse set of workforce. Let me give you 2 examples. What happens when you are not inclusive internally as you build products? For B2B products, if you cut out critical stakeholders like professional services, you end up not knowing what are some of the challenges in creating a shorter time to wow for your customers, because you're really not looking at the implementations teams and their feedback on how the product can really shorten the time to wow. So that's an example of not doing a good job of internal inclusion within the company to build better products leads to a worser customer experience. And obviously, user non-inclusion, which majority of this this talk was about, impacts adoption. It impacts renewals. It impacts NPS. So to me, product inclusion is not an option. It's actually embedded in all of the key performance indicators that are underpinning the revenue and operating profit growth that a lot of companies are after. So it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of how, and how soon can you start shaping these KPIs on product inclusion and making them part of your vantage point in how you think about your product development. And the final analogy I'll give you is, yes, product managers are the CEO of the product. Absolutely. That is something that I really believe in. But product managers are also like urban planners. If you think about what urban planners do, right? They look at spaces and they try to maximize the design of those urban spaces so that the community itself can make the best use of those spaces. They can come together, they can make use of those spaces in a private setting, in a public setting. The community can grow through interactions. So in addition to being the CEO of products, product managers are also like urban planners. You're not just designing for a user. Inclusive product managers who build inclusive products, they are constantly designing with and designing through the users. And which is why having that inclusive mindset in how you collect data, how you design, how you get feedback from a cross-section of stakeholders, how you fill that empty seat on the table, helps you design with and design through with the users, leading to a better adoption. With that, I think I'm at the closing last slide. I wanted to share with you 2 helpful resources that have really helped me in my journey as I've thought about product inclusion. And obviously, I don't take any credit for them. These are some things I learned from as I went through a lot of experts who are immersing their life in product inclusion. So first is this book called Mismatch by Kate Holmes. How Inclusion Shapes Design, a fantastic book. It's more written from the perspective of design and how design shapes inclusion. And the second book, or the second resource, is the LinkedIn Fairness Toolkit. LinkedIn, as a company, has done a great job in shaping AI and ML practices that actually drive inclusion, because their mission is about creating economic opportunity for everybody in the world. And I've learned a lot from how they have scaled the large-scale AI applications within LinkedIn to serve their customers and subscribers like us in a much more inclusive way. So I'll highly recommend checking these resources out if you're interested in thinking about how to make your products more inclusive, both from a data perspective and also from a design perspective. With that, Jason and Andrea, I think we'll open for questions.
You're muted again, Jason.
Always muted. It's ridiculous. I need to do a check next time to see if being unmuted and off camera is actually good enough. But anyway, so we do have one question from Satya Natarajan. How to ensure being a gender-neutral legal compliance... I can show.
Flash it on screen might be easier.
How to ensure being a gender-neutral legal compliance not hinder filling gender gap, particularly female employer hiring needs during hiring. And there's an additional point there. We're always caught up with what the law says and what to fix the gap. Please suggest if you have any ways to address.
Okay, I think this question is probably tying back to the points that we discussed around points where we may be creating exclusion in how we either build products or how we build our companies. Could you go back to how to ensure being a gender neutral legal compliance not hinder filling gender gap, particularly female employer needs during hiring?
The way I'm reading this is like, how can you get more women, for example, into these positions without, I guess, indirect or reverse discriminating against other candidates? Is the way I'm reading that. Like, how do you bring it up without being too far in the other direction? Is the way that I read
Oh,
that.
I see. I think that's a great question. And obviously something as a women leader, I think about this all the time, right? How do I build teams that are, on merit and not moving the needle in an opposite direction? I think actually I'll put a plug for the first talk that Jason and Andrea that you guys did, because, that speaker actually talked about like smart and dumb job descriptions. And the way we write job descriptions actually has a very, very cascading impact on which people end up either applying or which people end up actually getting selected, because there is unconscious bias in the choice of words we use in how we write those job descriptions. But that's just one example. So if you haven't heard that talk, Product Dynamics inaugural talk, definitely go back and listen to it, because I think it's a fantastic talk. So that's one element. But if you think about the end-to-end hiring process, it's not one thing, right? It's a set of stages. How do you source candidates? How do you identify them? Then they apply. Then you screen them, and then you make the panels. And each of those steps actually need the right not just incentives, but the right the word is skipping my mind, but the right levers to be able to make sure that the outcome on the other side is good. So job descriptions, how they are written being one, making sure that the slates are proportional to the talent that we want our companies to be, right? Not just all male slates or not just all female slates, right? Having that balance is important. Creating panels, now coming to screening, creating panels that represent a diverse workforce, a diverse leadership team or selection team is important. I think the another form of diversity I create when I'm trying to recruit people is not just diversity of gender, but diversity of levels. Like, will someone be open to ideas coming from a lower level in the organization, or will they be too hierarchical, right? That's a very important part of creating an inclusive culture. So diversity, not just in terms of gender, but also levels. And then I think companies also need to spend a lot of time. And once you do bring in women or men or any other gender within the company, how do you create an environment to make them successful, which is the ongoing part of the work that everybody's trying to do.
Yeah, I just pasted a link into the chat, actually, something I saw recently, which I found interesting, which is a web page which allows you to detect gender, gender-coded words in job descriptions. So, for example, you can paste your job description in, and it will tell you if there are various words that are maybe more stereotypically male versus stereotypically female, to try and work out if there's a way to, I guess, work out how far in either direction the job description is, and obviously enable you to maybe switch that language up before you actually put it out. Because, for example, there's lots of anecdotal, from my perspective, evidence of job descriptions where, like, they're asking for feisty, aggressive, go-getters or whatever, and it's like, I'm sure there are plenty of feisty, aggressive, go-getting women out there, but at the same time, those traits are generally looked down on by senior management, because we all know the stories of people being, like, women being accused of being too pushy or too emotional or whatever, and trying that women may wish to not exhibit those because they feel that they're career limiting. So then to see those spread through an entire job ad then starts to be problematic, because you think they're looking basically for guys. So
yes, absolutely. And the other point is, like, women don't apply unless they meet like 95% of the criteria. And if you just shift the must-have versus nice-to-haves, let's just move some lines from the must-have section to nice-to-have. I've seen a lot more women apply to some of those roles.
I think while we wait for a couple of questions to come through, and please don't be shy, everyone. I see there's still people watching, so please drop in your comments. As you were talking, I just remembered this conversation that I was having with Amelia. And Amelia, if you're still there, please raise your hand. But she was saying how she got this, the ring that monitors your heart rate and your activity and all that jazz. Kind of like an activity tracker, but it's a ring. And once a month, it was telling her that it looked like she was getting sick because her temperature was rising and she was getting a little bit stressed. And of course, the one thing it didn't count on is that she's a woman. And once a month, women go through certain changes. And she was like, how is this? She's like, I'm not sick. It's just natural. And so, this ring wasn't taking this into consideration. So it was very clearly designed by men, whereas my Garmin actually asks me, to put in my symptoms and what am I feeling and how am I doing. So it's a very interesting approach to this technology that is tracking me all day long.
Yeah, you bring up a fantastic example. Actually, that was one example that I missed to include. Like, when Apple's Health app first came out, for the first many years, you could track everything about your body, but it didn't allow for women to track their monthly cycle, right? And that means that they were almost alienating almost half of the user population, but by not allowing to track that important part of their life. And then they obviously fixed it later.
Yeah, I remember, just before we go on to some further questions, there's a really good book called Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez, who talks a lot about areas like this. For example, how phones are designed for a typical man-sized hand, and certain kind of diagnostic tests which will, for example, really clearly detect heart disease or heart attack symptoms, I think, even in men, don't pick up necessarily some of the ones in women, because they've all basically been built by men and they didn't have anyone else in the room. And actually, on a very different tangent but very similar, is like the chat I had a little while back with the product manager from Microsoft, who, well, I think they call them program managers, so whatever they're really called, but a product manager at Microsoft who was banned from joining up to Clubhouse because her surname was Poon, which was basically picked up as basically offensive, because obviously it is slang for certain things, but also actually a very common surname in certain parts of the world. And her point was, well, all they had to have is like one Asian person in the room that would have said, oh, by the way, maybe we check some of these words, versus just having a bunch of middle-class white guys in the room just downloading some random list, not even bothering to check. So I just think it's something that I see echoes of again and again, and it's just really, it seems like a really important problem to solve.
Yes, absolutely. I think we have some questions there.
We do. So Joshua says, what is the end result or goal? Is it not only, I'll put it up on the screen again. Is it not only ethnicities or gender? The whole system is built on bias. So what is the long-term goal?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think at the end of the day, it's all about a journey, right? Like it depends on where you are starting. For products, and there is a lot of companies that talk about inclusive products in terms of just accessibility, right? Can somebody access location, gender, if it's a physical product, accessibility from a physical need perspective and so on and so forth. And that's one dimension. And that's a great KPI to work on. But at the same time, I think it's a journey of uncovering unconscious biases and resolving those unconscious biases as you build the product. And as accessibility may be one dimension, gender and ethnicity and location can be another dimension. And then there are other unconscious bias that we end up just accidentally building as we build data-enabled products that we can only uncover once we have taken care of some of these foundational things. So I see this as a maturity of the products as we build our products, but taking care of some of the basics like accessibility, gender, ethnicities, location, geography, skills, language, and then going up the radar to remove some of the other unknown unconscious biases that we may not be aware of.
Thank you. So we also have one from Sindhu, which says, what could be the KPIs we could use to evaluate a product in this perspective? Although actually then clarified, what could be the KPIs used to evaluate a product in terms of inclusion and diversity?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. And I think I will double down on or relate it back to the second question that we just discussed. Okay, where are you in your product inclusion, not maturity, but just dimensions? Are you solving for accessibility? Then your metrics will be more around accessibility, right? For example, WebEx just a couple of months ago released some really good features around being able to show emotion, being able to translate, when there are multi-language groups on a WebEx call. Now that's a great great feature, but the KPI that I would attach to it is, does providing that translation, real-time translation, voice-enabled translation, actually increase the input of people who are language diverse or who speak a different language than English? And if the answer is yes, I think they have, that feature has paid off. So ultimately, I think what I'm trying to say is, ultimately, what you choose to build as an inclusion feature has to be working backwards from a typical or particular experience that you're trying to create. In the case of WebEx, they're trying to make sure that the meetings are inclusive, regardless of what language you speak. And working backwards, how do you enable that? Well, they created a feature that provides real-time translation. And if the participation goes up, which is a KPI in this case, that means that feature has met its purpose. But you could be somewhere else in your inclusion journey. If you're building a product that predominantly serves like oil and gas or industrial sectors, that's already a very male-dominated industry, right? You could take a look at, okay, well, how is the NPS of male users versus female users? Are we perpetuating the gender challenge and the gender stereotype that's already in those industries, or are we creating products that will actually help more female women be more successful in those industries once they get to those technology roles? So I would say there is no one chart that fits all. It's a matter of selecting KPIs at the right time in your inclusion journey. It can range from accessibility to language to gender to ethnicity to location, and even demographics or the type of industry that you're serving in.
Excellent, thank you. I don't have any more questions. I have a question actually based on your experience, and obviously you say you've got a career yourself that you've built out in Silicon Valley, and you're also now working with a bunch of other companies and advising and mentoring and so forth. So that seems to suggest to me a couple of things, one of which is you've probably seen this done quite well from time to time. and also like personally from companies that you've worked with, and also probably seen it quite badly done from time to time. And I wondered if maybe you could give shining and whatever the opposite of shining is example of both of those situations.
Yeah, great question. So I think there are two companies that I think are making the right amount of effort, because as I said, this is a journey and I don't think there is a gold star today. There is no gold star in diversity and inclusion in general yet, because everybody is on a journey, right? And inclusive products is a second stage people think right now it should be. But I think Netflix and LinkedIn, in speaking with leaders there or understanding how teams are building products there in terms of really building AI products at scale that are inclusive, I found what is coming out of those companies to be heading in the right direction. I won't call it gold standard, but heading in the right direction. They're asking the right questions. They're immersing the right technology. They're including the right set of KPIs. They're all B2C companies too. So I think a lot of the companies that are moving in the right direction, I'm seeing they are B2C companies because they have large amount of users that are either global or very diverse that they're trying to serve. I think the B2B companies have a lot to learn from this, from the B2C side of experiments, and maybe build in similar learnings or similar capabilities. I'm trying to think which company I would say. Actually, I'm not sure if I should say which product. I'm trying to think if there is nothing that comes to mind that I'll feel comfortable naming on the on the call. But I think those two companies I would say are putting the right amount of effort in this direction. They also have a long way to go.
It's interesting actually, because obviously one company that very famously did this was Google a few years back when they started flagging loads of pictures of black guys as monkeys, basically. And their solution to that, I mean, obviously, to give them credit, they didn't mean to do that. And that goes back to your point about AI being kind of biased from the off because of the types of data that get put into it, and probably the types of people that were in the room helping to make those decisions about what they trained it on in the first place. So they jumped on it straight away when it was flagged, and that was admirable. But their solution was simply to not classify anything as a gorilla anymore. They didn't fix the problem, they just hid it.
Yes.
So I guess where I'm going with this is, obviously it's better that a black family don't upload a picture and half of them get tagged as gorillas, because that is horrendous. But do you think that Google should have tried to fix that properly, or do you think in situations like this it's better to just kind of get rid of the obvious outliers and live with it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Here's my perspective on this. The way this situation was solved is very similar to other things. Like if you see anything inappropriate on a Google search, you can call it out, right? So you are sort of outsourcing, and you can creating a community effect to find these issues. As an empathy for a product manager, I understand, because a product manager or somebody looking at the data cannot potentially uncover everything that can go wrong in an algorithm. So again, if I give points to Google for being curious and being open to input from the users, for anybody being able to come and flag it as disproportionate or correct it. That's step one, because I think the alternative of one person or one team taking responsibility to curate almost everything is never going to work. So I think it's a step in the right direction, while it is not the perfect solution that we would like it to be, because I don't know an ideal solution where I, as a product leader, or my team, data science team, in a product can possibly capture everything right now.
Yeah, I think I've always got that feeling in the back of my head whenever anything goes wrong for any company as a product person. Obviously, just feel really sad for that person, because we've all been there, right? Not necessarily in that situation, but we've all been there when something.
We've all been there. Exactly. There's a lot of pressure, and as I think the point that I made about design, not just design for, but design with and design through.
Yeah.
And that's very important. Like, how do you uncover unconscious biases not alone, but with the support of everybody else that's sort of interacting with the product?
I think it's really important. I know Andrew was about to speak, so I'll stop.
It's okay. I was going to say much like like you mentioned earlier, instead of move fast and break things, I had been using move fast and learn things.
Yes.
And then I realized moving fast isn't necessarily the point. The point is, I think it was, I want to say, was it Eli? I don't want to mention the wrong person. Could have been Randy. Someone in the Twitterverse said, Saeed said, move deliberately and learn things. So move with intention. But I think this whole concept of moving fast and break things just became this like thing, and everybody just started, going based on that. But the important thing in product is to actually learn from what you're doing.
Yes,
and learning from your mistakes. And I think to the point of the question that Jason just asked about, I was going to call you Jared again. Jason asked about Google, is while I think the quick fix might have been to remove it, that still doesn't solve the problem.
Exactly.
Right. So the problem is still there, and not fixing the problem causes a lack of inclusivity because you're still essentially removing an entire set of people from this, and that's not right.
Yeah.
No.
Actually, that also brings up a good point. Sometimes we know there is a problem and we wait till we find the perfect solution, right? And like, what can we do iteratively, even if you're chipping away at the problem, while versus waiting till you have, like, in 6 months, you'll have the perfect solution. And that's a mindset which is more helpful when you're trying to build inclusive products versus, the perfect solution.
Exactly. Excellent. Does anyone have any last minute questions? We still have a few people on the line watching. I'm going to give you all a couple seconds. Or maybe not everyone types as fast as I do. I've been complimented for my fast typing, so. But it looks like no.
I think people are satisfied and have lots of opinions and things to go away with and things to try out. So I'm hoping
it's certainly been a wonderful talk. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you as well, Jason, for your time. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. If you want to watch this back, you can watch it back on the same URL if you want to share it with your teams. It's definitely a really, really important topic to be discussed. So again, you can use the same URL, and we will see you next month.
So we did have one last question.
Oh, yes. When does one start?
I think you start now.
You start now.
You start with discovery. What is it that you don't know? Like, where you may be being exclusive. What is it that you don't know? Just get started on this journey on what unconscious biases you're not aware of as you're building your products. Just start now. Start asking questions. Start looking at data. What data are you excluding? And I wish you good luck in this journey, and I'm excited for your users to go through that journey with you.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, as long as people have it in their mind, then they're still, like, even if they don't fix everything in one day. And I guess one way you could look at when does one start is also like at what stage of a company.
Yes.
I know you touched that yourself earlier with regards to, like, not everyone can hire a chief of diversity or whatever, but at the same time, at least having these feelings and thoughts in your mind and maybe at least going, every now and then is still better than not doing that at all.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Joshua, Sindhu, and everyone else. That's all as well. And we'll be back soon with another exciting guest. So,
stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers.
Bye.